All right, everybody, welcome back. This was going to be our kickoff show for the Three Wise Men. Me, David from DMR Publications, and Luke from Rush Creek Survival, but Luke got called off tonight because he's an on-call cop. The purpose of the show is to talk about current events of national and international importance and ask your questions. And we're going to start off tonight talking about recent attacks that we've had. Active shooter in Boulder. We had an active stabber incident out there in the Capitol building. And what I wanted to talk about was what we train people on for active shooter. And the most common one that's been around for about 20 years is called run, hide, fight. I'm sure you're all used to. It's not that it's necessarily bad, it's how it's taught. It's not universally taught the same way. We teach people to run. We don't teach them how to run, they run away. And the reason I wanted to bring this up was I recently looked into some stuff and saw, I don't know what the percentages are, but people have been in active shootings. There's a good number of people that have been shot in the back of the head or the spine. It's because they're running directly away from the gunfire, which is what people would do. They would run directly away from the threat, which from a gun is a bad situation. You have to figure most of these people that are doing shootings haven't done things like this before. They got adrenaline and dopamine in their body. They're probably at this point, some of them focused on what they believe the reactions will be because they've seen it over the past few years of how people react. And all they have to do is fire in the crowd. And there's things I think can be done better. And if you're going to get shot, you don't want to get shot in the back. So what I started thinking about was like when you're in combat or trained for war or even cops, when there's gunfire, what you're trained to do is to take cover, not to just run away. Now, granted, it's their job to do these things, but you should be taking cover. When you take cover to make sure you're not shot, that allows you to get out of the crowd, especially if there's people tripping and falling over each other, and gives you time to assess that situation and decide what you want to do. At that point, if you're going to run, what you should be doing is if you imagine the screen here, camera's at an angle, got a bad guy up here and he's shooting to the bottom of my screen, and you take cover behind the microphone. If you run, you should be running laterally to that person. Couple reasons. One, most of the time they're only seeing a profile shot. So if they do shoot you, unless they get a headshot, it's going to hit you in the arm, probably maybe the leg. A wound you most likely can survive from. Additionally, people aren't trained for these types of engagements or what to do. And unfortunately, to your advantage, this sounds bad, but there's other people that are targets now. And that gives you the option to run that way. So my suggestion, the way to teach people is, it's not just running away. You need to run laterally. You need to find cover. When you get that chance, run laterally. And even with kids, if you can teach them to understand or learn a little bit about firearms, even to understand what it means when somebody's reloading, so they could take that opportunity to run laterally. They get that few seconds and move to the next cover to move on. Then there's the less degree of likelihood that they're going to get shot, and they have time to stop, think, make decisions, and make whatever reaction they need to. That being said, I want to know because David has a background in security, Homeland Security. He has on DMRpublications.com, he has at least one article on active shooters. I think you have two.
Yeah, I'm actually certified through the DHS to teach active shooter scenario and corporate situations. So,
what do you tell people when you teach that?
so yeah, I mean, you've got the fight situation, you've got the hide situation, you've got the run situation. Each scenario kind of depends on your proximity to the person and your, let's say, your location, right? If you happen to be in a situation where you can run, clearly that's going to be the best case scenario, unless you are equipped and capable to stop it yourself. But when you're running, I saw the comment in the chat, zigzag, sort of. That's not a terrible piece of advice there, but in any situation, especially like in schools or in corporate office buildings or even parks for that matter, it doesn't matter. You don't want to continue on a predictable path, and you don't want to be out in the open. But see, that's hard to do in a, like, say for instance, you're in a long straight hall with lockers. Well, running dead center down the hall is not smart. If you had to run down the hall down the center or along the lockers. You want to choose along the locker, for a lot of different reasons, especially like you said, if there are others in the hallway. Um, just for the optical issues related to the actual shooting event from the shooter himself. So, yeah, that's kind of an important one. But let's say you're in a classroom and the shooter's out in the hallway outside in your hall. You don't want to go run into that. That'd be a bad idea.
Oh yeah.
um, that's so you really, and in that situation, that's probably going to be a hide and shelter sort of a thing. That's going to be the barricade the door. That's going to be, whatever. Maybe see if you can get out the window or something like that. It really kind of depends on the scenario. We could paint different scenarios if you wanted to, but um, the fight situation, that's an individual thing that I tend not to encourage unless somebody is trained or has run out of space. Let's see if the shooter has the high ground, like the Vegas a few years back.
I think the benefit for the people in the crowd in that situation was at nighttime. Makes it more difficult to see. They were at a greater distance. Unfortunately, with the weaponry he had, it caused the bullets to be somewhat less accurate, but covered a larger area. And the size caliber he was shooting, especially the 7.62 at that distance, can cause more damage to the body. Some people were able to take cover behind certain objects. I don't remember exactly the stage, but there was things out there that could take cover on. There was way too many people, and it's a mob. I'm sure there's plenty of people that got injured that never got shot just from the mob running out of there.
Yeah.
And that goes back to what David was saying about going in the hallway. A guy told me one time he was thinking about telling his kids, if this was to happen, I think what you should do at your school is pull the fire alarm because emergency services will show up. And I told him I thought that was a bad idea for two reasons. One, emergency services show up, going to be the fire department. You want law enforcement. Number two, what are kids trained to do in a fire drill? To leave. And what you're doing is putting more people in line of fire. That's where that barricade situation, if you're all in the room's better. Not all schools, but a lot of schools have that glass with the wire in them. Makes it more difficult to break, which also could affect if somebody tried to shoot through there with a firearm. Depends on the firearm and the distance. Another thing is, the schools I was in some buildings, and office-type buildings are still this way, at the top of the door, there's like a silver box, and then there's this V-shaped arm that comes out that the door flexes on. If that is there, what you can do is take a belt or some type of object like rope, preferably something like a belt with a little stick here, and you can wrench it down on there and make it more difficult to open that door, aside from just locking the door. Because why you want to do that extra feature. Because even if you can lock the door, there's no guarantee that that's going to stop them, depending on how motivated they are to get into that door and what tools they have to get through that door. And eventually, unfortunately, I think we're going to see an active shooter in a place that is something like offices or a school that, based on what they do, is they've really thought it out. They're more well prepared. Or we see somebody start breaching doors with a shotgun and using other weapons to shoot people. Somebody that knows what they're doing. And that's going to be more terrible than anything we've ever seen.
That Vegas shooting is a very complex situation. In that situation, because here's something that a lot of people don't take into consideration is the echo. So when you're hearing that type of fire, it's oftentimes, especially from that altitude, if you want to call it that, from that height, it's going to be hard to gauge exactly where that sound is coming from. So you could take cover and inadvertently be in the line of fire. So, in that situation, it is best to run, again, along buildings, along, not out in the open, but along the buildings, along the fence lines, along whatever. Use the shadows, because it was at night. Use the shadows to the best of your ability, and run away from the sound, if you can, if at all possible. And of course, here's the sad truth of the situation. Once the lead starts flying, there is no warning beforehand. Clearly, That would be not in the shooter's best interest. They're trying to do as much damage as possible. So there are going to be people who are hit right out of the gate, and then it's going to take a minute to register that. Wait a second, we're being fired upon. Is this is this the pyrotechnics of the show? Is somebody throwing fireworks out? It takes a minute to register that you are in grave danger. And when that happens, once it registers, maybe you see a couple of people drop. That hopefully that fight or flight kind of pops up in you, but then you got to think, find the wall, find the fence, and run away from the sound. Because especially if they have the high ground like that, and you're assuming that it is coming from anywhere that they have a good vantage point.
And you want to make sure too that if you're moving along, say, a fixed structure like a wall, if you have a reasonable degree of certainty that you're still somewhat in the line of fire, to make sure you stay at least an elbow's length off the wall for a couple reasons. One, it's very easy in the chaos to trip, fall, hit windowsills, all that kind of stuff. But the other thing is, one thing I learned a long time ago, you could go into a room in a house when we used to clear rooms, and you could shoot at a wall, even at not much of an angle. Depending on the type of bullet, and if it tumbles, it'll actually bounce across the wall instead of ricocheting back. People don't realize that. So finding the wall is good. Plus, if it's a mass group of people, you're not going to get caught up in the middle of the trample. But you don't want to be necessarily on the wall unless you have to, just for the possibility that bullet ricochets. There's no guarantee what the results will be, but that's something to consider.
And situational awareness is always key. I think that's something that a lot of people do not practice that they should. And to me, that's, when you walk into a restaurant, you look around, you're looking at the people, not necessarily what they're eating, what they're drinking. You're looking at the people. What are we dealing with? Are we crowded tonight? Is there less than normal? Whatever the situation is, you're just kind of assessing the situation for what it is. Who's around? Is the drunk belligerent guy extremely belligerent this evening? Whatever it is, and you're just, I don't know, self-awareness. That's a practice skill, I think.
One of the things I talk about, that people that do jobs like I did, or even at higher levels, anywhere they go, they look for exit points, multiple exit points. If something was to happen, where can I go? Where can I get away? What are my options? Do you know where the doors are to the back storage area in your grocery store? Do you know if there's any other emergency exits? Do you know where the dock loading area is? Do you know if there's a door there? There's places when I moved here that you can drive behind them for deliveries. You're not supposed to be back there, but people, accidentally do it all the time. So I would accidentally do it just to identify the cargo areas and doors that were on the back sides of buildings, just in case, for places I frequently visit, so I would know how to get to them. I don't know how much difference it would make if there's hundreds or even thousands of people at a concert, but having an idea when you go in there, even if you can find out beforehand, but once you get there, are there gates that, there's security guards at? You can't go through this gate because the band's over there, but I could physically get through that gate if I needed to. If they mark it off with chain link fence, can I realistically climb this or get somebody over it? How far am I away from exit points? What obstacles or obstructions are there I can get to and hide behind? Unfortunately, I think people need to think about this because of the action that's taking place, but I think it's smart for people to always think about this. We got asked a question last week about what to do in a situation like a riot. And I think the question was about, like, your vehicle breaks down and, you got to get out of there. But some people get caught in those situations that are in buildings because they live there, they're at a store, they're eating in a restaurant. How much would it help them if they had ideas of other exit points? There's always another way out of a building than just the front door. There's very few places that are businesses that only have the front door. There's plenty that do, but even then they usually have a back storage area, some place that people can go. So that's just something to think. And remember too, if you get in a place that has a cooler area, especially a meat locker, if you can get in there and secure that door, you could be safe from a shooter. Somebody needs to be able to get in there and get you out, because it's going to get cold. But you need to be aware of, where are the exit points? Where can I go? What paths will I take out of here? Don't be thinking about what person you're going to trip. Don't be that guy. The old meme. Survived a bear attack with a .22 pistol. Former friend who got shot in the knee, not so lucky. Probably not the way to go.
Right.
But be aware of your elbow cuff. I don't know what that means. Yeah, be aware of your surroundings. At least know exit points, paths you would take, places you would go, how you would get out of there. Let's see. Any questions about current events from the crowd, or things going on in the world, or updates on the Big Five? Venezuela. We had Venezuela fighting the FARC in Colombia. We had China doing drive-bys in Taiwan.
Did you
India,
see
China,
the
chummy?
yeah, well, where is this? Let me see if I can find it. It was a couple of headlines that came across today. Yeah, fears grow. World War III could be triggered in a month as Russian military seen on the move. Russian military analyst Pavel Felgenhauer has warned World War III could be sparked by rising tensions between Russia and UK, and things could really kick off in early May. And then it followed up. There was another one with swarms of ships. Beijing tightens its grip on South China Sea. Yeah, and these pictures are insane. They are swarms of ships. It's incredible. Yeah, it's some interesting stuff.
I'm not saying they're wrong, but it's always interesting to me if it has anything to do with the Russian military, you're always going to say World War III. That's an 80s thing. And then now more often it's China as well. But there's so many other ways it could happen. Like when we were in the Middle East going after ISIS because we thought they were going to get on their hands on WMDs that were there. Nobody really talked about World War III, and I was like, that's theoretically possible. Or this tanker in the Suez Canal that got freed. If they could prove that was done on purpose, especially if it was an actual attack, something like that there or around the Strait of Hormuz, any of those trading areas, that could trigger World War III. Every once in a while, Iran does something out there near Hormuz. And nobody discusses that. Or the Gulf of Aden going in the Red Sea. People discuss Iran because it's on the southwest tip of Yemen, but that's the wrong area. What you should be worried about in the Gulf of Aden is China, because their military is in and out of there all the time, securing their own maritime traffic for the stuff they pull. It comes usually through Sudan up in northeast Africa. So I'm not saying they're wrong. I just find it interesting. It's only Chinese Navy in the South China Sea or anything with Russia where we talk about a major war. I don't think people realize how many opportunities are available for a war to happen every week, probably, at least every month.
Definitely kicking up.
Yeah, it's heating up. Part of it too is new president. You got a new commander of the Pacific Fleet came on board. Changes like that are well known. People know they're happening, so boundaries get tested. Just like having a new teacher. You know, if you got a single parent, they get married, have a boyfriend. People test boundaries. It's normal. Not saying it's okay or nothing won't happen. I'm just saying it's expected something's going to happen. I think China's hedging their bets that our government's focused on the Middle East again, or at least that's what's in our news. You know, we're already talking about moving back into places, not withdrawing in Afghanistan. We've already started doing some stuff in Syria. They probably think they're being ignored, and they're not. But how many ships are in that photo, you think? Like 50, 150?
Let me take a look.
Largest navy in the world now. By boat count.
Let's see, in this one picture, if I had to guess, see, that's fun.
While he's looking that up, I'll say what we want to do with Luke is do this show. It's probably going to be infrequent until we can lock down a schedule and at least forecast a show. And then hopefully in the future, we'll have some more things on speed dial that we can show you on a screen share of what we're looking at.
And this one little, and this is a continuation, but in this one little tiny thing, I'd say there's probably 120 fairly large ships. So some of these are tankers, some of them are military, but it's pretty substantial.
We got a question about that Ebola outbreak. It's it's in the U.S. right now. You see anything new on that?
Find anything? Yeah, sorry, I'm trying to keep up here.
I'll mention too, Ebola is not only terrible. If you look up numbers on it, what's the most lethal? Make sure you know what you're looking at. I think the one they track as the most lethal was because the lethality rate was something like 90%. The thing about that is thankfully they were able to contain it to a small area. There was another one that the mortality wasn't that high. I mean, it's bad, but it was like 40 or 50%, but it broke out. It got places and I think killed a lot more people. Bottom line is any sort of hemorrhagic fever is terrible. And if you watch any documentaries on them, they wear those Tyvek type suits for biological agents. You can actually buy those online if it's something you want to add to your prepping supplies for medical stuff or any type of infectious diseases. You can buy them individually, but for about 80 or $100, maybe 120, I don't think it's that much. You can buy a case. They usually have 30 or 50 sets based on size, which I think is small, medium, large, extra large, because I have a case of them. But if you're looking to add some more medical stuff to your prepping supplies that are more long-term that you might need, you can pick those up even individually pretty cheap.
So let's see. There was at least 23 in the state of Washington, 45 in Ohio, 4 people in Oregon. I think Kentucky is looking at about 11 people. There's some people in Idaho. But I haven't seen too much more from that. It's just, I would imagine some of that's going to remain hush-hush until everything has been verified, but that's about what I know so far. I am trying to keep track of that, but yeah.
The ATF rating houses that have 80% lower buyers. Are these the guys selling? I imagine these are guys that have companies that are individuals selling 80% lowers. I haven't kept up on the current changes, if there's any in laws and how that's playing out, because I don't build firearms. It's not something I pay attention to. And then here they should have known that was coming. My first thought that reminded me about was when states started legalizing marijuana, how the federal government would still come in and take some of them down, which they backed off on quite a bit, but initially they took a lot of people down. So I don't know what the law is there, but we talked about years ago when 3D printers became big, people were going to start printing firearms, they'd be regulated, and then the ATF did add some stuff there. I even know a guy here that's bought a 3D printer and he's printed parts and stuff to try them out just to see what will work, and got some to work that he had to register. Well, this is true, but it's all going to come down to what the law is, what the law says, and what they believe they can prove. That's the story at the end of the day. And what I tell people all the time is, I understand constitutional rights, what people think about laws, who has the authority to do what. I get all that. But at the end of the day, if you're aware of that, but you're also aware what the laws are, there's decisions you make where you may be taking a risk of something happening. It's just like anybody that sells pot and grows it and has a business legally in any state like Idaho or Colorado. It's great that they can do that. I'm fine. I'm for it. But they are taking a risk. The federal government will step in.
Yeah, you definitely got to understand that there's a different set of rules at play here. It's sort of like that case Cox versus Kettler, So when that situation happened, there was the state of Kansas had put out a law that said that you could, if you manufactured anything firearm related, essentially, and it didn't leave the state, you didn't have to license it, you didn't have to do anything. It was a constitutional thing.
Nice.
Well, so yeah, pretty cool thing. And then they raised the stakes on it a little bit and said that anybody who tried to infringe upon that would be committing a felony and blah 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 blah, which is all great. That's all state law, that's state constitution, 10th Amendment, so on and so forth. 10th Amendment supporting the Second Amendment, sort of a thing. Well, so Cox and Keller, they were producing silencers, which was legal under the law. And I mean, a lot of people getting involved, but it was all, they were following Kansas state laws, what they were doing. Well, they ended up getting arrested by the feds and charged with felonies and so on and so forth. Well, here's the kicker, and this is something to think about. the state decided they weren't going to defend these people at all. They let them roll hard, very hard. And so they go to court, and of course it's going to get appealed. It was worse than that because it was under federal law that they got arrested. So they go to federal court, and of course, if it gets appealed, it goes to an even more federal court, a higher federal court. They didn't have a chance to begin with because it all started with the Fed, even though the state said that they were going to do this, and they didn't come to bat for them. So you got to take that into consideration as well, and be prepared for the aftermath of how jacked up that situation can really be.
Yeah, because despite what people think, it sounds like the situation was letter of the law as interpreted by judiciary and possibly enforcement was you didn't violate state law, but you sure violated federal law. That's what happened to those pot farmers.
Yeah.
Here's a good question. So my first piece of advice is this. If you can get a lawyer or somebody you can talk to, you want to get one. But if you have a business of any way, shape, or form that even deals with any subject, but in this case firearms or anything that would fall under any of those statutes, you need to have that lawyer available to get them there. It's just like if somebody showed up with a warrant, first thing you do, like in TV shows, is you want to contact that lawyer.
On speed dial.
Yeah, on speed dial. You want to be able to get them right away. Because it's just like any situation. You do not want to interfere with an investigation or obstruct justice, but you need legal counsel, no matter what your situation is. They're trained and educated on that stuff for a reason. There's things that may sound like a good idea you shouldn't say. There's things even Luke would probably say might be a good idea to tell law enforcement. But the right to remain silent exists for a reason, even if you haven't read your rights.
Yeah,
the other thing is,
everything can and will be used against you in a court of law. There is nothing in that says that things that you say will help you in a court of law.
and anything you say before you read your rights can still be used against you because you haven't been read your rights yet, even if you're aware of them. Because the situation doesn't dictate the reading of. Most of the time, we'll say. The other thing is, anything you do beyond that point only falls under two categories, depending on how it's interpreted. It's either you comply or you resist. But part of having a lawyer on hand is to understand the legal implications. Like, if somebody shows up with a warrant, or these guys show up with or without a warrant, and here's what they want to do. They want to come in with a warrant, without a warrant. We'll keep it that simple. I call you, but what do I do if they don't have a warrant? What do I do if I have, can I legally have the right to wait for you to arrive? If you can be there in a reasonable amount of time. These are questions you want to ask a lawyer. Hey, double B. But that's what you need, legal counsel. You need experts. So you want legal advice, you need a lawyer. Even if you just got a lawyer that's a relative that has a good enough understanding of the law that doesn't specialize, some sort of legal counsel. You don't want barracks lawyers, people telling you whatever. You don't want the advice based on a guy that lives in another municipality, let alone another state or situation. You want a pro. And if you've got the money to put them on retainer, you should. You may need them for other reasons, especially if you have a business. I think that's one of the biggest mistakes people make in business. They don't have lawyers.
Yeah, well, and that's the funny thing. I mean, so here's kind of the thing. If you have or do anything that's going to, prompt ATF to be at your door in the first place, your lawyer should automatically be on speed dial anyway. And if they're at your door and you haven't done anything, then chances are there's just a horrible mix-up somewhere. So don't do something stupid and get yourself hurt or in trouble.
Yeah. And I did a podcast on a guy. What his story is that he was concerned about being followed by the police, him and his girlfriend. The story came down to he's at his property shooting some guns. Cop shows up for whatever reason. They take all his guns, but they don't arrest him. What he says is they believed he was a prohibited possessor, and he was in the system as a prohibited possessor. It just turned out in the same area he lived, there's another guy with the same name that was the prohibited possessor, and they mixed it up. Now, I don't know if that story had all the details, because my first thought I said is I don't understand why you weren't arrested if you were a prohibited possessor. Maybe they didn't have to. But he was in a situation that he didn't even know was coming, and he complied. He did what he was supposed to do. But that's something else. There could be a mix-up. And that's why you want to, let's say you are a private party or have some sort of business where you're doing things with the 80% and no matter what you think, you're really not 100% sure, talk to a lawyer and find out. Am I, or at the point this came out, even though I wasn't aware of it, it was a week later and I sold these 3 things, what should I do? Get that advice and get ahead of it. Figure out what can be done. There's a lot of things like that I can't speak specifically to this law or gun laws, but in general, there are times where there's not an amnesty period, but there's an understandable thing about whether or not you reasonably should know if you did know. If it was an honest mistake, sometimes, some places, they'll cut you a break. Or the fact that you came forward and said, hey, found out about this, saw it 2 days after it came out. During that 2 days, I sold these 5 items. Not saying you need to do that. I'm saying you need to seek a lawyer to find out from a lawyer, should you do that. Yes, it's the lower half of the rifle. There's an upper and a lower, the 2 main parts.
Yeah, the upper doesn't really matter.
Yeah, the upper is the barrel and the chamber, carrying handle where the sights attach, all that. The lower is the buttstock, the pistol grip where the magazine goes in. They're connected by 2 pins. The
part you would register is the lower.
Because that part has the serial number and it has the functioning parts that make bullets fire. The upper is just the barrel where and the chamber where the cartridges go in, the bullets launch. That's why some people, even some companies, sell ARs that have 2 or more uppers you can get. They could be interchangeable barrel lengths. They could be interchangeable calibers.
Yeah, you get a shorter barrel with a varmint or something like that. Absolutely, because the application's different. You can hunt with some of them. Some of them are going to be for personal defense. Some of them are going to be for other things. What is the problem with the lower?
I think we just answered the question. That's why she said, oh, okay. So I would agree with the statement. What I do not know is if the law dictates that. But they do tend to call them lowers and uppers, or the slide and the lower. But the law is probably fairly specific. Most of the laws are pretty specific on the types of firearms that the law applies to.
And they vary greatly depending on jurisdiction.
Yeah, it's like assault weapon. You always hear that. I think some Congress people say assault weapon don't know any better, but I think there's plenty to do. Assault weapons exist in law. They always have. Assault weapon, by legal definition, which has been around for almost a century, are fully automatic weapons. And there's NFA stamps and the tax process you have to go through to acquire one. They do exist. By the law's definition, even if they add a new law and it finally passes, a semi-automatic rifle that only has a semi-automatic function is not an assault rifle. An assault rifle is a fully automatic weapon. And in definition, it is a rifle or fully automatic carbine, which is shorter than 16 inches. So a fully automatic Glock may be written into the law now, but at the time I had learned about it, those were written under a different statute or something for like automatic pistols, but they weren't considered assault weapons. Assault weapons, I actually think we're called assault rifles.
And if anybody's curious, AR does not stand for assault rifle. Or
Armalite, the company that invented it. I would say you're committing assault is defined in law, but that doesn't make it an assault weapon. If you point a weapon at somebody, you're committing a felony. It's called assault with a deadly weapon. That does not make that revolver an assault weapon. It makes it assault as the crime, with a deadly weapon as the caveat.
Assault pencil.
He may also just mean that based on the way it gets spread in the media, they call anything an assault weapon, just like we have the assault knife now. Nobody said that, but you know, that guy, I think it sucks that happened at the Capitol, but he was of color, of whatever ethnicity, Islam. I think he was Islamic or had ties to Islam. But you would hear more about it, unfortunately, if it was a white dude, especially if they were a veteran. And some people seem surprised by that, but you go to places like Europe that have stronger gun laws. The attacks they get over there with machetes and knives. So it's not out of the ordinary, it's just out of the ordinary here. Fortunately, a cop died, but I think that guy died too, because they shot him. He was talking about the media. Yeah, that's how they spin it. They're a for-profit company. They are not news.
It's a ghost gun, 30 round clip magazine. I can never. Do you ever see that video of the
Oh
guy who's trying to
yeah,
explain?
ghost gun, 30 round clipazine. That dude. I had to look that up. That was real.
Oh my gosh, it's the most incoherent babble ever. And the cop in the back. I'm surprised the cop right behind him is not just like, what in the hell is wrong with this guy? But he does. He keeps a straight face and allows him to continue. I'm just like, this is so stupid.
Well, it's funny. You can still find the video of Donald Rumsfeld when he was Secretary of Defense, gave a speech, and there was military behind him. He was at a military base, and he was talking about stuff that had happened, and he mentioned shooting down the plane in Shanksville during 9/11. And all the military guys were like they had no idea that happened. There's still people that don't think that plane got shot down.
They were like,
They made a movie. It must be true. So this is advice I'd never give to anybody. Number one, for all kinds of legal reasons. That's probably not something you'd ever want to think, do, or say, especially if that happened. There's, again, something you want to talk to a lawyer about, or at least a cop. Like, I've known guys here that have been in situations where they would pull a firearm, but they didn't point it at the person. They pulled it. They showed it. They're what you would call the low ready, but lower than below their target, to walk them off their property. Cops were called. Person that called the cops told the exact story they did, and they were not, of course, prosecuted. Had they pointed the weapon at them, might have been in those situations. They may have been able to get away with it till they got off their property. But the thing is, when you're using lethal force, there's rules and laws about it. But I'll call the rule of thumb, this isn't legal advice, rule of thumb is typically things like life, limb, or eyesight of you or somebody in your immediate vicinity justifies use of lethal force. There's also been cases where they say things about, these are court cases and specific situations. They're not general guidelines or written in law, but about there's reasonable justification if a man attacks a woman, just due to, generally speaking, most women are physically smaller than men and not as strong as that opponent, where they might be in fear for their life. And there's been cases where, there was even a case when I was doing private security before I joined the military, where we got educated on it. Two guys that were cops. And they were telling us about how there's a situation where a guy brandished a weapon, shot one of two attackers, and he was getting his ass kicked. And the court decision was, had there been three guys, lethal force would have been justified. Thing is, based on everything they said, if he won a shot, he'd have been killed. So there's all kinds of, it's like people say, well, in Texas, if you shoot a guy but you drag him on your porch or there's no law that says that. That probably happened. Somebody probably did that at one point and got away with it. But that's bad advice.
yeah, and that varies by state. Some states have stand your ground. Some states have castle doctrine. Each one of those are very, very different.
Oh yeah, castle doctrine is not the same in every state that has it.
Yeah. So you really need to you really need to kind of know what the deal is, or really just be in so much danger it doesn't even matter what the law is.
Like, this speaks to the standard 4 rules. One of them is, don't point your weapon at anything you're not willing to shoot, which they've now said willing to destroy, which I take it to mean if I even think somebody has a firearm, I automatically assume they're willing to use it, use lethal force. And this speaks to, we talked about this in the last show with everyday carry, the responsibility I think people have to understand how to use the tools and items that they carry, understand the implications and the situations. That's why you can buy a gun, you can go to the gun range, you can shoot a few rounds, go target shooting once in a while, carry a gun because it's your right, you have the right to do so. But you have a responsibility, I believe, to learn and understand the situations of how to use that, not only legally, but for your safety and others. Because there are people that have been in the right theoretically, but when they chose to point the firearm or use it, they were in the wrong. And the situations I've seen, they could have learned beforehand better decisions, but they didn't get the education on it. Yeah, and this is more true now than ever. Cops know a lot more about what they're doing, especially in places that have experience. You got to figure. I don't care what TV show you watch. If somebody gets shot, there's going to be blood. If you move the body, they're going to figure it out, even if it ain't by the blood. So you don't do stuff like that. You familiar with HR 127? Is that
yeah. So,
yes. You talked. Didn't is what you talked about yesterday?
A little bit, yeah, yeah. So yeah, all laws that are repugnant to the Constitution are void.
Marbury
That's
versus
my
Madison.
yeah. That's my position on it. Not good, guys. I think,
It
but here's the thing. And let me be very clear about this. I think that as a society, we have really screwed ourselves in regard to all of our Bill of Rights. As I have said this repeatedly, and I will continue to say it until the day that I die or until it is corrected. There's not a single right in the Bill of Rights that's not currently being infringed upon. You should be mad about all of them.
If you don't know why, you should read them.
Right?
I'd be honest with you. If you told me what the Bill of Rights are for, I'd have to read 8 of them off the top of my head. 3 of them. 7 of them, sorry. I'd have to read 7 off the top of my head. And I couldn't even quote the other 3 correctly. But yeah, it's understanding that stuff. The thing is, too, is there's assumptions you shouldn't make. Like, you shouldn't assume that because you're in a conservative area that loves guns, that if you use a firearm in a situation you think consciously I wouldn't want to do in Los Angeles, that somehow is going to make it easier for you to do so. Your understanding should be laws, legal implications, and the situation at hand.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let me support that statement with the idea that just because you live in a conservative area doesn't mean that your conservative, quote unquote, conservative representatives didn't say they were conservative just to get elected. I can tell you that
John McCain.
Emphatically in my area that there are people who run on conservative tickets that are anything but. Yeah, John McCain. There's a lot of rhinos, right? Republican in name only. Yeah, yeah, that's a great point. Chamber just hit that one out of the park. Home run.
Brilliant. Civil War. So, in theory, we're definitely on that path. If it was to happen, when it was to happen, the cause greatly varies. I think there's plenty of situations that could make that happen, not because of our past in the Civil War, but because of what's happened in other countries around the world. For example, significant economic collapse affecting your ability to have goods and services, even work, buy anything, very quickly could turn into that. An attack could turn into that. We talked last week, somebody talked about World War III, and I mentioned one of the biggest threats to our country is a nuke, but launched at a high enough apogee becomes an EMP, where if you launch it over Ohio, the amount of stuff it affects could completely destroy our country to the point that the rest of the world could rewrite the borders without us knowing. We could be such in a state of chaos, even after we try to recover, at some point could become a civil war. Anything that's happened in the last year, if you look at those autonomous zones, cops were there, they weren't doing anything. We've seen all that, no matter what anybody's opinions on are. A bunch of people call themselves patriots wanted to show up and do something about it. What if they had? And then what if it became ugly, and based on what the news reported, whatever information you found and whatever people said, true or not, other places in the country reacted. It could have become one. Very simply. So there's reasons why, but David, I think you probably have more specific math on what indicates this as one of our hotspots.
Well, you think about what causes a civil war, right? So when you look around the world, what sparks it? Well, a lot of things can, right? You're talking about, political division. You're talking about money, right? Economic stress. You're talking about reconstruction, basically. Split in ideological visions, right? So like socialism versus free market capitalism. And there's here's the other thing too. When you look globally too, you'll notice that civil situations tend to come along with sometimes global. And look back at World War II. I mean, there was a whole kinds of strife going on in Germany. The communists and the socialists and, I list those too, but every political party was having some really big issues. It was back and forth. There was already a lot of fightings, riots and stuff like that. You can see the warning signs when this begins to occur. And I think that in a lot of ways we are seeing those warning signs. So if we don't come back from the ledge here, I think that the potential for it to spiral is definitely there, because the media seems to continue to push the division, governments continue to push the division, people within each side continue to push the division. It's and people are becoming enraged about it for various reasons. However, it doesn't mean that it's definitely going to occur. As we talked about earlier, I mean, you look at what's going on with the potential for a global war, an actual, deep, strong, significant war. That would pull people back from the edge a little bit. Or, and here's the other thing, while that is the potential to pull people back because everybody wants to unite over this big, threat, it could also push it over. Because, and it's interesting, and this is something that I've been pondering and trying to think about for quite some time. If you look at the radical socialists and communists of this country, if we went to war with a communist nation, what side would they choose? And that's one that's been kind of playing with me, because how that unfolds kind of depends on who's in power, what state are they from, etc., etc. That's a complicated mess. And factor in inflation, economic strife, and everything else, and you've got yourself a really bad, and of course we could factor in disease and so on and so forth. It's a very, very complicated mess. But I will tell you that I think that regardless of whether it starts civil or global, I think people will take advantage of the other, either way. So that's kind of my idea on that.
Oh, yeah, I agree with that. Let's see. Oh, Myanmar. They've been in and out of civil war like Yemen forever. Not as long as Yemen, but that's nothing to. I was concerned about. I think it was Brazil recently. They replaced all of their military leaders. Then Venezuela. That place is so tore up, probably why they don't have a civil war. Let's see. Do you think there'll be guerrillas? Well, maybe. So understand what, by definition, a guerrilla is non-military people that a foreign external military trained force comes in and trains how to fight conventionally based on their tactics. That's what guerrillas really are. But for what most people think guerrillas are, then yes. Yes, I am.
See, what had happened was...
What happened was... Yeah, Africa is fun. Al-Qaeda is real big there right now, has been for a long time. A lot of things going on across Africa. It's a huge continent. It's crazy. We've talked about for a long time doing an Africa show. I think that would be pretty in-depth and lengthy.
I will tell you, though, when it comes to the idea of global war, when it comes to the idea of civil war, when it comes to the idea of economic upheaval, etc., I think it would be in everybody's best interest to be prepared and keep your head on a swivel for just about any outcome, especially over the next several years. Yeah, that's probably the best advice I could
give. The other thing, too, is how do people decide it's a world war? If you look at World War I and World War II, as they're called, not all countries are involved. Many were. You could look at the Gulf War. Although it didn't last a lot of years and have a lot of deaths, there was a lot of countries involved. You could call the war on terror a global war. You could call it a world war. I think the reason people stick with the term World War and usually say World War III is historically, since at least the 80s, we've compared that to nuclear weapons or similar weapons being used on a global scale. So I think it really depends on how people choose to define it. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter how people choose to define it. Whether the media or a politician comes out and says it, the second they do, it'll be labeled World War III. If somebody in the Gulf War would have said that's World War III, or a politician, that's probably what it would be called.
So if my model's correct, we'll know, because I think all 4 of those zones will be active.
Probably at the same time.
Yeah.
Thoughts on militias? Probably only speaking to militias in our country. They're not a bad idea. There's really two types. One type is one that's recognized and sponsored by their state governments. The 17 or 19 states that do that, they tend to work emergency preparedness and response in conjunction with their National Guard. The other types are the ones that are not sponsored by their states, even if they're in states that have sponsored militias. The idea behind a militia, I'm all for it, but they're not all created equal. They have their own motivations. They're not all on the same page. And I'm not even talking about ones that are extremists that have done dumb stuff. I'm just saying there's a lot to be said there. The biggest problem that they have is they're disorganized. They lack the training. They definitely don't lack the ego in many situations. They're not bad. They just lack leadership, planning. If you look at like Malheur, I think was our last militia idiocracy thing that happened. They didn't plan that. I don't care what they said. Everything about that told me that if they did plan it, it made it even worse. They had no leadership. They had no plan. They had no exit strategy. They had nobody to communicate to anybody. I swear they sat around and said, what's the dumbest possible thing we can do to get attention? That was not the smartest thing to do. I understand why they did it, but it was just a bad thing. Militias are looked at badly, so I think we know at this point if any groups get involved in anything that becomes a standoff, militias, all people are going to be arrested eventually. But it's not a bad thing. I think that they're individually have their own ideas. They don't agree on a lot. They don't have the leadership. They don't have the training. They're not prepared to do anything, and they definitely don't have the physical fitness in most cases. The odds of a nuke, a tactical nuke, that's almost happened on more than one occasion by more than one country. I'm surprised it hasn't happened, but we have some pretty powerful conventional weapons like the Moab that was used in Nangarhar in Afghanistan, I think around 2017 or so. It's not as powerful as even a tactical nuke, but we used that to destroy most of ISIL KP at the time. I think the concern with anything with the word nuke to it still has so much stigma. That's why they won't use it. I'm not saying they should use it. I'm just surprised they haven't been used.
Well, you got to think about how many nuclear weapons have been detonated since World War II. Guys, it's been a lot. It's not just a few. It's been many, many, many. And
Thousands.
I think that if we're, and I think that if we're talking about tactical nukes, I think that really the odds of turning that nuclear weapon into an EMP device is probably the greatest threat. I mean, if another nation's gonna go as far as say tactically nuke a city or something, they'd be better off by launching it up in the atmosphere and watching it unfold, especially here in the United States. So, I mean, as far as threats go, I would imagine that would be I don't know. It would make more sense to me, it seems.
This here, I think what you're saying is what those groups should be. I think a prepper group, any group should be like that. It should be people that you trust and train. A lot of them don't train. They say they train, but they don't. They BS around, they drink beer, they shoot guns for a couple hours, and they call it a day. I don't think it's necessarily their fault. A lot of it's ego, but they don't have people with the knowledge of the training. I was in one for a long time training guys, and that's what we did. We trained. It was organized. We had schedules. They still carried on the same way. We had policies. We had contact with the government, state government. We were on emergency response for stuff. People did go out and help with things. Now they're working with sheriff's departments, getting trained by sheriff's departments. They're doing it what I'd call the right way. A lot of people will not do that or cannot, don't know how. Let's see. Absorb the first strike. I think what you mean, like wait till they get hit. Possible. Things like that people say, but you don't really know what they're going to do. I think it only takes minutes, depending on where it's launched from. I mean, if they launch from the Gulf of Mexico, it won't take long. You might launch it from the mainland across the world, it can take 20 minutes, an hour, something like that. Part of the technology, they can figure out where they're going and have an idea what to do. I don't know. I think it's foolish of any president to come out and even address those questions. This is true. It would be for a small area. The thing is, a nuclear weapon, the type of detonation it has an EMP effect. Thing is, when it's launched at a target like any regular bomb or missile, you'll never notice that EMP effect because pretty much everything will be destroyed. Or the things that, if anything, is affected by an EMP if it's a large enough nuke. Because when they detonate them, they don't detonate on impact. They detonate them in the atmosphere. Not really high, but as a weapon. Like if you look at Hiroshima and Nagasaki, they were about, I think, 100 yards, 200 yards off the ground. That's why it caused so much devastation. You get the whole blast radius effect. But the smaller ones, you would get some effect from it. It would depend on how they detonate it. It might be more noticeable. We play paintball and airsoft for training. So it really depends on how you're doing it. If you're using that to practice whatever skills that are you would call tactical, that can be benefit. It's also good to do that sometimes just for fun, just to get the heat out. But if you're if you're using it to provide training value, it's no different than simunitions for law enforcement and military or CERTA rounds. You get training value out of it. I would have a training plan, training value situation. You know, let people find situations, whether you're doing vehicle searches or clearing rooms or force on force, if you want to practice those kind of skills. But afterwards, I would just do the free for all fun thing. The port in Lebanon, wasn't that the one from like a year ago? That missile came in.
Kaboom! Yeah, and it wasn't well, and that was the thing. There were actually several very large explosions around the world that happened at about the same time.
Yeah, it was like a fireworks place or something. So Israel had the ability to do that based on the distance and the estimated missile photographs to launch it outside international waters and not get caught. So it could have been that. More likely it was sabotage. So I understand this statement going back to first strike. The thing is, because they can tell where it's going, I don't think you need to wait for impact. If you're going to respond, you should respond. It gives them less time to react. I don't want to see it go that far, but from a military standpoint, your only advantage if you're going to get hit is to react before you get hit. So not everybody has this capability. It depends on the systems they're hacking and who has them and what they're doing. And also depends on cybersecurity, people that can respond to it. Whereas if an EMP is used, you launch it over a high apogee where the atmosphere meets space essentially. And there's nothing we can do about that. It wipes out the grid essentially over 2/3 of this country and a good portion of Canada, which would be the most devastating. That actually, while it wouldn't cause as many deaths initially, that would be worse than if that single nuke hit any city. Even if it hit Houston or Los Angeles or New York and killed millions of people, that would be terrible. And there would be environmental effects. EMP, you'll get the environmental effects anyway, probably over a bigger area. But losing all that power, electronic grid, you ever seen a kid under 30 without a cell phone or social media? Imagine what happens when you lose all the electronics in your house, if you can't start your vehicle, if nothing works, and it's like the Old West. How are people going to react? The amount of chaos you can cause and the disruption, the fact they can't communicate with their military. Or
just look at what happened in Texas a few weeks ago. You know, they had stress on their electrical grid. They had stress on their electrical grid, not a complete destruction of, and it caused all kinds of chaos.
Yeah, and part of that's because of how the systems were designed and because of how Texas was back when they designed them decades ago. They're not tied into those emergency systems of the other states, so it makes it very difficult for her to get them. And the thing is, it's not unknown to them. There was a winter storm that had a similar effect on them not too long ago, sometime I think in the last 20 years, and they've done nothing about it. And that was from snow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I mean, that's just stress on a system. Imagine that, you know, where there are, you know, in all the, like Shammer was talking about, pretty much it would be from in between both mountain ranges all the way up through the central part of North America. I mean, that's an issue.
Yeah. I'm sure he said this, and that may have been his plan. I think it would depend on how many missiles are launched and the targets they hit. The thing about that is you're at the disadvantage at the negotiating table. You've also set the tone that you're not going to do anything about an attack of that magnitude. You're basically taking the position of Japan when they had no ability to react. I think politically and tactically that's a horrible decision, but it's not my decision to make, and I'm not president, let alone elected for anything. So this is true. A dirty bomb anymore means almost anything that's chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear, electronic. But yeah, well, a real bad thing is why so many people signed the agreement for biological weapons. Those are terrible. Like Ebola, weaponized Ebola would be terrible. I think by now, if Corona was weaponized, we'd know. But they are difficult to control, easy to spread with transportation, kill millions. Yep, that speaks to what I was saying. They're an isolated electrical grid. Oh, man, Joel loves talking about nukes. What's your deal, man? Of course you could. You could strike anything. I wouldn't, but that's just me. Funny thing, too, is you look up how many missiles there were and how many have been destroyed. It sounds pretty good until you see how many are left. The only reason they agreed to destroy them, I think, was politically. You couldn't ever use them all. Can't even use all the ones we have now. Thousands upon thousands of them.
They're probably going to be a threat if they were aged out anymore anyway.
Well, if you look at just places where we keep the waste, what that's doing to the environment. Even got that place where they built that dome on an island in the Pacific. That thing's leaking. I think most of that island's just a concrete dome. I think the bigger threat is cyber, which may lead into anything else, but I think the development of cyber attacks and what people can do is a bigger threat. War with China by 2034. You know, Friedman used to say he thought sometime in the next century it'd be Japan. Funny thing is, a lot of things he said, not all of them, but some of them correlate to what China's doing. 2034, so what, 13 years? Yeah. I don't know if it'll happen. I think that's definitely possible.
I think it's possible.
Last week I said if it was going to happen, it'd probably be in 5.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because, so let me see if I can, let me just look here real quick.
While he's looking, once they really started beefing up the Spratlys and putting installations and infrastructure there, their military presence has grown more often than not. The fact that our military was traveling through commonly known areas for decades that were well outside of international waters they're freaking out about. They're now doing flybys near Taiwan. Despite the fact people always do stuff like that, this is one of the ones where I'd say they are being overtly aggressive. They're trying to make it known they're not going to put up with this. And the concern is that they're going to not necessarily attack our Navy or something over there. The concern is they're finally going to go back and go after Taiwan. Because I don't know the history in detail, but there's a difference between what we knew as the Republic of China, what we now know as the People's Republic of China. The Republic of China, old school way, Taiwan was part of, but the common new government for the last century or whatever, People's Republic of China, Taiwan is not a part of, and that's where part of the argument comes from. Plus, you know, there's resources and trade and all that.
So I was curious about the year 2034 and why that was chosen.
Is that the UN thing?
I'm not sure. I don't know why he chose the 34, but I'll tell you that you know, I have a very, very strong inclination that by 2023 we'll probably see something very significant in regard to where it's going. So I think we'll have a pretty good clue, if not already be well on our way, figuring out what the next major conflict will be by 2023. And I think we're already seeing the hints of that. It's just a matter of which way it's going to swing first. Remember that, you know, we've got, and again, if I think we have four places that we should really keep an eye on. One is the Baltics, one is the Middle East and through the Horn of Africa, one is the South China Sea, and the other one's here in the United States. Those are the major places that we should be looking. And it's sort of weird because right on cue, I mean, we're looking at the Baltics right now, over through Ukraine and South China Sea. Both of those are really starting to get very active. So again, I would be very surprised if we don't see something with that really kind of tells it all by then. So that's just my opinion.
I don't think you're wrong. I mean, as long as we've been in the Middle East, more countries, even Iran, have got more involved. Missiles, different attacks in different countries, things that have expounded now.
Well,
I
even
don't
like
think
China,
that's going to
China
stop
just
if we leave.
China just signed that was it $400 billion deal with Iran, and you know these situations are definitely getting bigger and more elaborate as the day goes by, and so you know, and again, you know, just kind of looking at the model. When I look at that, I mean, that's our tell. That's when that's supposed to go. So I guess we'll see. I kind of hope I'm wrong because of how everything's been unfolding, but I guess we'll see.
Well, it's far enough out based on the progression of things in any of those areas that anything can change, happen, be delayed. Like to me, 23 is fast, even in South China Sea, but it could happen quicker.
Well, and that's what the new admiral said the other day. You know that the outgoing admiral was like, yeah, within 6 years this is going on, and then the new admiral was like, it's going to be sooner than 6 years, and then so, you know, it's really strange to me to have been sitting here talking about this publicly since 2004, and it all kind of unfolding the way that it is. It's actually quite alarming. But I think probably one of the most interesting things. So there's a sect of science. It's a new science actually. It's been around since about 2010. It's called Cleodynamics, which is a type of science that's geared at reviewing history for cycles. And a lot of what they have found actually supports my model, which is scary for me, frankly. But I don't know. It's an interesting thing. It'll be.
Well, the other interesting thing is there's that website. Was it the Flager Group or something? Talks about they do population forecasts and they show significant reduced population in the world, and a lot of them are our country and allies of ours. The interesting thing is looking at your models and the things that make sense. It supports that because the countries that would be there, if these, because like I always said, there's no country that can take us on. However, they get allies. It can be done. If that was to happen, the losing countries most likely be the ones they're forecasting on their list. I don't know if they're looking at the same things or not. But what was it? America was like a 70% reduction in population. I mean, for that to happen, that'd be a significant attack. A significant of any type.
Well, and then factor in too, and here's another little wrinkle for this whole thing is that you look at fertility rates and everything else over fertility through 2043. I've seen over 80% reduction in fertility rates by then, and I've also seen some scientists are saying things that almost 100% by then, and so like the drivers of this, who knows, but when we look at like some of these strange diseases that are popping up, like this weird one that's going on in Canada, that trips me out. You get the of course the rapid mutation, double mutations, stuff like that we're seeing. I kind of look back at Dr. Yan and go, wow, she might have been right on this one. When we look at everything just kind of unfolding, the stress, and then of course the spending and the change in ideological direction and the infringement of rights and just these things, these tensions, not only globally but also domestically, and it's just like, yeah, it just really kind of makes sense, and that's sort of scary.
Hezbollah partnering with cartels. So this is an example of something that's become a little bit more public, but it's been going on.
Yeah.
The biggest reason for it is a lot of the smuggling that comes from places like Asia and Africa that head west, go through Africa, typically through Nigeria, and come in through Brazil through the tri-border area, which is Paraguay, Brazil, and whatever the other country is. It comes up through South America and Mexico, and one of the biggest players in it of all terrorist organizations has been Hezbollah. Not the only one. But yeah, that's not a new idea. It's just something that's not widely known.
And what's interesting about that one is if you go back to 2009, there were reports of Hezbollah actually being sent to Venezuela to learn Spanish, to learn how to dress like, walk like, basically Mexicans, so they could sneak their way up through the border. So that's fun to play with.
The thing is, the reason why Hezbollah can do this is they're funded by Iran. And one of the things I've told people is there's no way you can find this out. All I can tell you is you can believe me or not. Statistically, and this is a loose number, but it's pretty accurate. Most of what we call terrorism in the world, 85-90% of it are by Sunnis, which is the smallest population of Muslims. Al Qaeda, ISIS, Sunni organizations. But most of the money that's financed through terrorism is for Shia activities, which comes from Iran, which is heavily involved in places like Hamas and definitely Hezbollah, but they're not the only ones. Part of the reason Hezbollah can move around and do this and get so advanced in what they're doing to where because Hezbollah is really a political organization now. They have other groups within them, but they're all terrorists, is they just have unlimited funds. They have funds coming from Iran. They can do whatever they want if they have the motivation to do it, at least as far as financial considerations. Venezuela, yeah. Paraguay, Brazil, Venezuela.
That's something else to consider too when you're looking at all that. So like the border issue, when people that's a thing I really wish more people would know about. Like when I have my issues, I do have issues with border security, but it has nothing to do with Mexicans. It has to do with Hezbollah, North Koreans, etc., etc. And that's all right. So again, let's look back. I could go back to 2009 when we discovered that North Koreans had basically sleeper agents outside of our nuclear facilities, just waiting on a phone call. Our security it's a lot more than just economic. It can be a very serious, very real thing.
How'd you find out about that?
See, what had happened was I wrote about it.
Yeah, but you didn't make it up.
No, I didn't make it up at all.
How long ago was this?
So I wrote about that. It was roughly 2009, 2010, somewhere thereabout. I had a big week or so conversation on my show about it.
Interesting. You're not wrong. I'm just interesting that you knew. So this statement, I think, comes from, I think it was Yamamoto in World War II. It said there's a gun behind every blade of grass. Invasions on that scale aren't as common anymore in warfare. Not that they couldn't happen. I don't know that that's entirely accurate. There's plenty of countries that could be invaded that aren't, and plenty that are, that have to do with firearms. There's a difference between, like, if you look at gun laws they try to pass in this country, there's a big difference between being able to buy future firearms and keep the ones you have. And then if you look at real liberal states like Connecticut a few years ago, they tried to do that mandated turn-in of certain guns and magazines. It was only something like 11% of what they thought they knew actually happened, and then nothing went on with it. I think they know. When you use a test subject like Connecticut, I think elected leaders know it's not going to happen. It's going to happen to some degree, but it's going to be small. And then you have to look at states like, there's plenty of conservative states like Arizona and Georgia where the laws allow for you to do private party sales, and your requirements, I think, are reasonable. You a felon? I mean, you can't legally investigate them, but you can legally sell them, and you're not required to have a paperwork trail. Now, personally, I do for reasons to protect myself, but you don't have to. So the thing is, even if that came true, there's places where if they came to collect your guns, the only guns they could even hope to get, unless they're sitting out on your couch, are the ones they are positive you have, or you have to track the sales of. And if you didn't track the sales, you could get in trouble. But what about the ones you can legally buy or sell that you're not required to keep paperwork trails on? Like, I think it's smart when you own more than a couple of guns not to keep them all in the same place. It's just me. And all my guns are in my house. Just a personal decision. Canada will not sell their wood. We'd have to ask Luke. I don't know if he pays attention to that. I don't know anything about that.
He's a
probably
part of
reason.
it. Conspiracy.
He's out there with the terror beavers.
That's what he's doing right now. He didn't have a call. He's out there protecting the wood.
Yeah, so protecting the trees, man, my birch bark. Yeah, this was talked about. There's all kinds of reasons people said this was true. Not accurate, I would say. People were mistaking other reports or legitimate information on other organizations. Like, there's never been an ISIS anybody that did anything in this country. There's been people that supported ISIS unbeknownst to ISIS, like that guy in Florida. They only said that because he pledged allegiance to ISIS on the phone call before he hung it up and shut up that club, but he wasn't an ISIS member. Here's the kind of statement you don't make on a YouTube recording. Just saying. And now they know. Colorado, now they know. They're going to be climbing up through the snow. Where's your guns at? Is this a real question? Are you being serious? I think the pellet rifle will be better as a bat. I don't care if you shot him in the eye. You're probably serious. I don't mean to make fun of you, but no, that's not. In a gunfight, no.
I like 7.62. I wish there was some different applications for it.
Yeah,
don't get me wrong. I like 5.56, but
yeah, there's a lot of different versions of the caliber. You know, some are pretty big, long distance, like a 54, but they're generally speaking, they're probably going to have the knockdown power and immediate effect. The other may or may not be a benefit is it may not be a critical hit. So, like with the 5.56, more than likely, for a more immediate result, it'll take more hits. But what the bullet does in the body can screw you up long term or take you out minutes later. Like people I know, like me, you've been shot or used firearms in a war zone, would tell you if they had to choose. I haven't met anybody that would rather be shot with a 5.56 than a 7.62. Now, granted, those are a 39 and AK round, but even still, I'd probably be rather shot with a 5.56 than a 308. I don't know what this is, but it sounds fun. A big pellet. That probably is. I haven't had a pellet gun since I was a kid, but it doesn't surprise me I have bigger calibers now.
I got a 12 gauge pellet.
Yeah, so feet per second. So the feet per second is just how fast it flies. That has zero to do with the kinetic energy and the distance, the energy it has at the distance. After that, it's what does it do when it enters the body, if it does enter the body, not to mention standard layers of clothing. What's it going to do? Is it going to go through there? I can foresee situations in an apocalyptic movie where somebody uses a pellet rifle that may very well at least be a distraction. But it's not I wouldn't consider that a self-defense weapon. But they can be good hunting weapons for small game.
Smartest person in the 80s was Marty McFly with his bomber vest, with the puffy. You remember those puffy vests?
Yeah.
Those are brilliant defense vests. If you're gonna, I mean, for a lot of for even some big rounds, it'll actually go a long way to stop some of the issue, like with hollow points and stuff like that. It can definitely save some. Well, at least for a hit or two, save you some trouble.
This feet pounds is when I say kinetic energy. It's the amount of you can look up stuff on ballistics to understand at different distances how much feet pounds of energy bullets have. That's what makes a difference. 308 turns cover into concealment. So do grenades. Yeah, that can be true depending on your cover. I call it the myth of cover because there's always something that can defeat it. Which for anybody out there, if cover is something that generally speaking is probably going to stop a bullet, where concealment stops you from being seen. So bulletproof glass is cover but not concealment. A toilet paper wall is concealment but not cover. Some things can be both. That's all it is. But I call it the myth of cover to get people to understand Even if it stops everything, it's not like you're in a 360-degree bubble. There's always a possibility.
But everybody in the area is going to know you shot it.
Yeah.
Those things are loud. Boom.
But yeah, you want to look up the energy. Like you see AK-47 shoots 7.62 by 39 in movies all the time, and what people say they can do. The thing is, it's only effective to 100 meters, and I've explained this to people. Can you hit targets more than 100 meters? Absolutely. But the effective range to a person, what it can do, is only about good to 100 meters. Typically, the effect it has at that point isn't enough to be of significance in like a war zone. It can be. You can get lucky hits, and it can hurt. Whereas the 5.56 round can be more effective out to like in a M4, I think it's 450 is what they rate it at. There's other 7.62 bullets, 308s, 300 Win mags, the 54 shot out of those old Russian rifles, and there's a few others. The 300 Blackout, which with the right barrel you can use 5.56 magazines. It was created to replicate the effects of a 7.62 but be more effective at closer and longer ranges. And it's actually a very cool round because what's great about the ballistics and the energy of that round, even if you don't buy subsonic rounds, which are meant for silencers or suppressors, they're significantly quiet. They're actually a pretty cool, fun round to shoot. Ammo gouging. That's normal. It's like gas gouging because we're in the Middle East. What's worse is when people buy and resell for stupid amounts of money, like when they thought there was a gun thing early in Obama's presidency or second round, and they were buying $500 Smith & Wesson M&Ps and trying to sell them for $2,500, which, whether they made sales or not, when all that went away, they drove up the prices of cheap ARs. Didn't help anybody. That is not a completely accurate statement. The weight doesn't decide the energy. There's a lot more to it. There's also how fast is it flying, and that's because of the explosion of powder behind it, not to mention the design of that specific bullet. Not all bullets or pellets of the same caliber created equally. I'm sure you've seen pellets that are wad cutters or hunting rounds or hollow points. They're all different. I don't know, maybe Biden's trying to follow President Obama and be the best gun salesman in history.
Well, heck, I was talking about this the other day. It's like 40% of gun sales over the last couple of years have been females and African Americans. That's pretty good.
Slingshots, I'm sure they could be effective against a person. They can be great hunting tools. That can happen. They're killing zombies with them on The Walking Dead. And I don't mean to make fun of you. I mean, all kinds of things like that. If you got the practice, they actually sell BB-sized weighted ball ammo. There's even people that have competitions with them.
One of the most famous stories in history revolves around that. So.
Oh yeah, with the sling, not the slingshot. Taking down the big man. That's so funny. David and Goliath. The Philistines. That's an Arabic word. If you translate it English, it's pronounced Palestinian. Just saying. Based on word context and historical stories, despite your biblical beliefs, there's a lot of people that can prove, doesn't mean it's right, David and Goliath is really about a war between Israel and Palestine. I don't know if that's true or not. Yeah, it means Palestine, I mean. Magnesium in the tip, not of a bullet. What are you trying to figure out? I'm not going to tell you how to make non-conventional weapons. That'd get me banned and probably sued or arrested. Yeah, slingshots, bows and arrows, all that stuff. I think they're fun just doing primitive weaponry. They're fun just for recreation.
A bow staff.
Bow staff, yeah.
Yeah, let's just get real about it.
You can always find a staff.
That's right. Great bow staff is a like a broomstick.
I've known several people wanted to get martial arts and learn how to use weapons and wanted to know what weapons were the best, and the one they never mentioned was the staff. And I was like, that's a weapon you should learn.
Oh, I love bow staff.
Aside from the dexterity, coordination, and the power of it, You're not going to find throwing stars, nunchucks, and swords lying around, but you probably can find something, even a broom, that could work as a staff.
Yep.
And it goes back to what's his name on The Walking Dead. He's a badass with a staff. Glow in the dark tracers. They don't actually glow in the dark. It's what's on them and the heat. But yeah. The thing with tracers too is even if you buy them, which they're expensive, you want to load them like 1 every 5 rounds. Maybe 1 every 3, but not too much. The heat of them can damage the barrel of your weapon. Like in fully automatic weapons, I think they're 1 in 5, 1 in 7, and then 5, like a AR-15, M4 basically in the military. They're usually like 1 in 3, 1 in 5, 1 in 4, somewhere in there. And some guys like me, we'd load the last 3 rounds in our magazine would be tracers, just so we knew we were empty as it was coming. Even if we only saw 2 of them fly, we knew we only had 1 bullet left. Oh, I know what he's talking about. It's that little flexi stick, and you put the ball in it, and toss it overhand, and it throws the ball really far. You ever seen that?
I guess
it's a slightly curved plastic arm. They're probably about 2 feet long, and in the end, it has a cup that snugly fits a tennis ball. You just kind of flick it, and it'll launch a long way with little energy. Really work that dog out. It's really great for people that have issues with their hands or arms, or they're older. But that speaks to, I don't name the name of the weapon. It's on the tip of my tongue. There's YouTube channels, the guys talk medieval weaponry, but it was a type of spear, and the spears weren't that long, and they had a stick they held with a notch in it and a groove.
Yeah, and then you would fling the stick.
They would fling it, and it would have massive amounts of power and accuracy.
Yeah, that was an amazing weapon.
Yeah, I just watched a video on that. I say I just watched. It's probably been a while, but I remember a guy doing it, showing what he could do with it. He was real accurate. But I don't watch like videos on that stuff unless it's like primitive weaponry. But yeah, that's pretty cool. It was used by like real old school, like maybe not Neanderthals, but like old school Native American type stuff. Oh, he's just testing pellets. I don't know how much information there is out there on pellets and what they can do. I would look that up. There is, what's the site? There's a guy as a website, and he talks about bullets and ammos and guns and things they'll do. It's really informative, but he also talks about pellets on there and which ones to buy and why. Different weights, different designs, because they make ones now that got like a copper BB in them, the wad cutter flatheads, the pointed ones for hunting, for penetration, hollow points, round nose ones that I think are meant more for target competition shooting. Atlayal, that's what it's called. Atlayal, he says. Probably right. I was thinking it had a K in it. Or it's that spelling. You guys got any more questions about what's going on in the world? We're getting on to an hour and a half.
Really?
Surprising.
It's pretty good.
All right, well, I guess we'll end this then. We don't have any more questions or comments. Thanks for joining. We'll definitely try to let you know next time we do this, especially if we can get Luke on here. And just for people who are still here to let you know, I'm going to start doing the regular Sunday show an hour early. So it'll switch to 5 Pacific, 8 Eastern to help Luke have the ability to be on there. So it was 6 and 9, now it'll be 5 and 8. Just so that you're all aware, and I will pre-schedule the next one, which I forgot to do today. And I definitely want to have a law enforcement conversation with Luke on there. It's just verifying we can get him on. I don't want to schedule it and find out he can't be there. That would be terrible. So thanks for coming. Thanks for David from DMR Publications. If you like the content, give us a thumbs up. Definitely go visit David on DMR Pub, P-U-B, on YouTube, dmrpublications.com, or his podcast, Disagreeable Thoughts, Philosophies of DMR Publications. And you can find that podcast, the video version, on his YouTube channel. Definitely check out yesterday's if you want to know more about the gun control laws and stuff that's been going on. Thanks for being here, and we'll see you next week.